the whole purpose of this talk is to show you what you can see, or specifically what I can see from Melbourne, which is 37 degrees south. But given that it's not so far up to Sydney, that you guys will get pretty much the same views of the same objects that I have. So this is kind of cool. So Northern Hemisphere folks, they don't get to see most of the cool things that we get. So I thought I might share with you a little bit of that. Of course, I'm from Melbourne, fabulous city, as you know, got the greatest football team in the world.
Go the Swannies.
No, the Melbourne Demons are the greatest football team in the world. Yes, there you go. I've been to too many games against the Swans, and they've had the wood on us probably 9 times out of 10, but it is nice to get one over them occasionally. Doesn't happen often. We usually go with a mate of ours who, I don't know, he's got some silly thing. He barracks for the Swans because he used to play for the Bloods or something. But anyway, I don't know. He's deranged. Doesn't matter. It's all good. A little bit about my family and I. This is us. This is the boys. We have 3 teenage boys and a dog. Dog's called Barnaby. That's the wife there. Her name's Robin. I think you might have met her before.
Yep, Robin's presenting for us.
Yep. So she's pretty handy and very accomplished with just about anything she sets her mind to. So currently she's studying psychology and blitzing it, as well as running the Australian Photographic Prize and being all the other things that Robin does. Anyway, I'm also a judge. I've been involved with the former AIPP for the past 30-something years. I judged at APA for 28 years consecutively. I'm a full-time photographer. That's our studio. That's the what we call the Melbourne Headshot Company. So the studio is located right in the middle of town, right in the middle of the city on Little Collins Street. And we shoot CEOs, execs, politicians, lawyers, and all kinds of people for LinkedIn and their profiles and that sort of thing. So we've had the privilege of shooting 2 prime ministers, 4 premiers, and just about every politician in Victoria. That's our sort of thing, and that helps to pay for our hobbies. And that's me down there at the bottom left with my current weapon of choice. And that beast there is called a Takahashi TOA 130. So I'll get into that a little bit more detail shortly. But that's a little bit of background, guys. All righty. So what's this thing about 37 degrees south? Well, here's a little projection of the Milky Way that is pretty much showing, I guess, in a reasonable season, what you can see at 37 degrees south when you're looking directly south at the Southern Cross. And as the year goes on, we can see most of all the way out to Orion and Orion's belt. And we can see as far left as Altair and some of the other Milky Way objects. As I said, that gives us a bit of an advantage because most of the cool stuff in space is in the Southern Hemisphere. And you can see a lot more when we reveal it in hydrogen alpha. And this is using research telescopes around Australia and other southern continents. They're basically designed that they take effectively what's called a kind of a Google map of the sky. So everything is mapped. It's unlikely that, I'm going to discover anything new up there, but I might be able to be the first person to photograph something. But overall, the sky is well and truly mapped, and it makes it a little bit easier for us with this hobby to find things that we want to shoot. Particularly
for the uninitiated, hydrogen alpha.
Yeah, we'll get into that in more detail, but hydrogen is one of the main building blocks of space. Most of space is, I guess, in the Milky Way. It's one of the more common elements up there, and it's one of the building blocks of, I guess, a great many emission nebulas, and that's what we'll be photographing here. And hydrogen alpha vibrates at a specific wavelength, 650 odd nanometers, but we'll get into a little bit more of that. I've got a couple of graphics that'll show you that afterwards, how we can filter specifically for that. But before we get to that, we need to talk a little bit about telescopes. And here are some of my favorite telescopes. So it takes a lot to impress my kids. So when I brought this beast home, that, as you can see, that sort of wowed them a little bit. And that was a Newtonian telescope. And that's a design that hasn't really changed in 400 years. So it's got a great big aperture up there on the far right-hand side, where light basically just travels down to the end of the tube. There's a mirror there, where light then bounces back to a secondary mirror, which directs that light to the camera. The camera is near my son on the right-hand side at the top. So this is kind of what we call a light bucket. You can see the specifications there, where it's effectively a 1200 millimeter or 1148 millimeter lens, if you like. And it's a fairly fast unit because it runs at f4. That's when I then pimped it and put it in all its glory. So I took it to a powder coater, stripped the rings back and turned them black, stripped the mount back into a million pieces and powder coated that in Apollo 11 colors as a tribute to the moon landing. So that's in its glorious silver and gold. And I must admit, I really did enjoy using that beast in the country. I've since sold it to my best mate and he's using it still. So I haven't gone too far from it. This is its little tiniest, babyest brother. I say tiny and baby because this is a refractor. So a refractor is basically a little bit more like a camera lens. So there's light coming in at one end, straight down to your camera at the other. This is relatively short at 336 millimeters of focal length. And that's, you put a 300 mil lens on a DSLR, that's a fairly serious chunk of lens. But when we're talking telescopes, that's kind of a baby. So it does give a nice wide field of view, and it's quite compact, as you can see, somewhat over-mounted in this case, sitting on that great big behemoth of a mount. Now, the reason we have a mount is that, as you know, the Earth rotates through the night and we get apparent movement of the stars, as they cross the sky. But of course, the stars aren't moving, the Earth is rotating. So with a mount, what we can do is then the mount rotates parallel to the core of the Earth. So as the Earth rotates, the mount's rotating in parallel. And that means that anything that we've got our camera pointed at remains static in the viewfinder all night long. And that's the basis of the whole deep space astrophotography. And then this is my current weapon of choice. This is the TAC. In terms of comparative lenses, if you think maybe decent entry-level lens for a DSLR might be a Tamron or a Sigma, and then you've got your Canon or Nikon L series excuse me, lenses. One more time. And then at the top of the range, sorry guys. At the top of the range, you've got your Zeiss lenses and your Leica lenses. Takahashi is a Japanese telescope manufacturer that makes Leica equivalent lenses and telescopes. Excuse me. So this is kind of the Rolls Royce of telescopes. Absolutely stunning, beautiful thing. Never thought I'd own one, but most of my gear I bought secondhand. Telescope nerds are great people. They look after their gear like it's their firstborn child, and they only ever really get rid of it when they're trading up or when the wife said, honey, you're not using that stuff, get rid of it. So I managed to pick this one up at a reasonable price, and my camera is bolted on the end of that. I was lucky enough to win that in a international astrophotography competition. It's a $12,000 camera. That was a pretty cool pickup, and so on and so forth. The box I'm holding there is called a NUC. So that's a headless computer. And with the NUC and with a program called Voyager, I can drive my telescope remotely. It can be anywhere, and I can just log into it via the internet, tell it where I want it to point, how many exposures I want it to do, et cetera, which filters to use. And I can literally tell it, to do all this stuff while I sleep, which is pretty cool. It's taken a while to get to that level of automation. But once you get there, there's just no going back, and no more spending cold nights, operating telescopes. So that's been a journey. It's taken about 9 years to get that far.
Excuse me, Andy.
Yeah.
What are those two big words down the bottom that have appeared twice? Ioptron trivia.
The tripere is a combination between a pier and a tripod, and that's what the thing is sitting on. Okay. What happens is, as the night goes on, the telescope rotates on the mount, and it gets to a point where it has to do what's called a meridian flip, where if it keeps going, it'll literally, the opposite end of that, where the camera is, will crash into the base of the pier. So it has to then turn itself around and then keep going. And the reason we have a pier instead of a tripod is it gives you a little bit more flexibility with the travel of how far the camera can go before it hits a leg. When we have a observatory in the country full time, as we hope to, I'll have a pier buried in a block of concrete about 1 metre deep. So with these different telescopes, we have different fields of view. So with the Newtonian being quite a long telescope with a reasonably long focal length, I can kind of zoom into the heart of a nebula. And what I thought I'd do is I'll show you the same nebula with all the different telescopes so you can get a feel for the different field of view that we get. So that was with the Newtonian. This is with the refractor, the big Takahashi. And you can see there's a lot more going on there now that we pull back a little bit, because I can't change my, what am I trying to say here? I can't change where I put the telescope. I can't move the Earth, but I can change the field of view. So here, I don't know what the guys at the Anglo-Australian Observatory were smoking tonight, but they named this the Running Chicken Nebula. But that's what it's called. And as we use the tiny short refractor that I showed you earlier, and we pull right back on it now, you get to see the whole nebula in its glory. If I were to name this, I'd call it the Jar Jar Binks Nebula, because it looks a little bit more like a certain unloved character from Star Wars. But it was kind of cool to be able to see the whole thing. NASA has a thing called APOD. Not sure if you've heard of that. It's the astronomy photo of the day. And I've been lucky enough to be featured 6 times with NASA. And this particular one was the very first image I shot with that little telescope. I literally had it on order, picked it up from the depot on my way to a star party. And I picked it up that afternoon, set it up that night, and shot this particular image. And lo and behold, it was an APOD. So that was pretty cool. I don't use this telescope much, but I can't quite bring myself to sell it. So it's probably just one of those ones that's going to sit in the cupboard for a lot longer until eventually buy a camera. It'll fit it maybe one day. So that's a little bit about field of view. Now, let me know, this is a short video. Let me know if you can hear it. Otherwise, and if you can't, I'll scrap it straight away. So see if you can hear this. Can you hear that okay?
No sound.
No sound? Okay, I'll scrap that one. We've had that issue before. So I'll just move on to the next slide. Okay. What I wanted to show you was shooting galaxies. And to shoot a galaxy, you've got to get out in the country if you want to photograph a galaxy, because there's just too much light pollution in Melbourne to be able to do that. And this one is called the antenna galaxies. These are what they call interacting galaxies. And by interacting, they're literally colliding. These 2 galaxies that have decided that, space isn't quite big enough for the 2 of them, so they're going to run into each other. What's extraordinary is this can take somewhere between 500,000 to several million years for this process to happen. And surprisingly few planets and stars actually hit each other during one of these events. But this is the most distant object that I've photographed. This is 60 million light years away. And a light year, as you know, is the distance that light travels in a year. It's something like 10 trillion kilometers. So if you multiply that by 60 million, it's just a bafflingly massive, huge number that just defies comprehension in terms of how far away these things are. But how cool is this? With reasonably priced equipment, remember it's cheaper than a boat, I can take pictures now that are better than professional observatories could take when I was growing up as a kid in Time Life books, that are probably better than professional observatories could take even 20 years ago. And that's simply just because of the technology and the changes and the advancements that are available. For people like you and I, if you want to go out and get this hobby and start tomorrow, it wouldn't take too many years of work to be able to go out and photograph yourself a galaxy. And it's sort of a little bit mind-blowing when you think, it's taken 60 million years for the light from that galaxy to hit my camera. So don't drop it, it's kind of cool when it's like that. Just a quick question, and I don't have the Zoom on my screen, so I'll let you, Tim, to poll people through the chat if you like, or ask people in the room. Who's seen a UFO? Has anyone seen a UFO out there? What have we got, Tim? Anyone got their hand up, or anyone on the chat?
No, I think we got a 0 on that one.
A 0, okay. All right. Well, I haven't seen a UFO either, but I've photographed one. Well, kind of. I photographed this. Looks like a UFO. It looks like a UFO being chased by stormtroopers. Pew, pew, pew. So this is an edge-on galaxy. This is called a sombrero. Now, here's some dazzling facts about this one. It's twice the size of our own Milky Way. We're seeing it edge-on, so it doesn't have that classic spiral from our particular point of view. But it's 28 million light years away. So let's just touch on a couple of big cosmic questions, folks. If there are UFOs out there, and I'm not saying there aren't, I'm just saying I haven't seen one, where do they come from? So let's just break that down a little bit. With our current technology, it's estimated that it'll take us about 85,000 years to travel to our nearest star. And our nearest star is Alpha Centauri, which is the brighter of the two pointers pointing at the Southern Cross. And that's just under 4 light years away. So 40 trillion kilometers away. Just a short walk, really. But even if we did get there, there's a triple star system there, but none of the stars are in what they call the Goldilocks zone, which is where the planets there, the exoplanets are, in that zone of not too hot, but not too cold to support life as we know it. So to go to a super Earth, which is a exoplanet in the Goldilocks zone, the nearest star that has one is Barnard's star. We're talking about now a 200,000 year round trip. 200,000 years. And this thing's like minus 200 on the surface, so it's great if you want a ski resort or something like that. But 200,000 years, that's to get to the nearest one. That's not even talking about galaxies. That's just, the closest thing to us in our little galactic neighborhood. So here's my question to you. And I'm not saying that UFOs don't exist, but if they did, where do they come from? And what kind of Han Solo, light speed, Captain Kirk, warp drive, science indecipherable from magic, as Arthur C. Clarke once postulated, technology would they have to enable them to get to us in our lifetime? And if they did, why would they bother coming all this way just to probe some Kansas farmer's bottom?
I think you're underestimating the DeLorean in this process, I think.
Maybe so.
Put a space-time continuum in the DeLorean.
Well, as I said, I'm not saying that any of these things don't exist. It's just that the likelihood of them encountering us in our lifetime seems so remote, because space is just so damn vast.
Well, theoretically, you can't. In our current scientific knowledge, you cannot travel faster than the speed of light.
That's what they say.
At the moment.
Yep, at the moment. We all live in a utopian Star Trek kind of world there, Ron, where we hope that one day we'll break that convention.
Isn't there a podcast out on ABC iView at the moment about you would probably know him, and I can't even think of him. He's a US Astro professor, but he's Russian by name, and he claims to have shot a UFO coming through our solar system because of the speed of the speed at which it was traveling. And it's just right on ABC podcasts right now.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I can't speak to that.
We'll go look it up. ABC Conversation.
I've got rolls of silver foil paper here for you, Andy.
Good on you, mate.
No.
Oh, no.
So one of the other things about shooting this stuff is you got to be dedicated. So with this particular image, this is 5 nights exposure. This is one photograph that's taken 5 nights, and each night at a dark site. The first dark site was 4 hours away, and the second one 3, just to get this photograph. I mean, it was worth it. It won some awards and stuff. But the thing about these, the reason they call galaxies faint fuzzies is for that very reason. If you look at them through a telescope, you're not going to see very much. You'll literally see a faint and fuzzy kind of vaguely grey galaxy-shaped blob. And you'll be a little bit disappointed, to be honest, unless you've got access to a 20 or 30-inch Dobsonian scope at a dark site. They're pretty underwhelming things to look at. That said, they photograph well. So
have you got your mind around the light you're looking at is 7 million years old, so the thing may not be there that you're looking at?
Well, it's a time capsule, isn't it? Looking back, we're looking back at, it's kind of like the TARDIS, really. There's the time machine up there, and it does blow your mind a little bit that sure there's a supernova, but we see it now, but it wouldn't be there. Sorry, if we see it now, it won't be there now. It'll only be there because we're probably seeing something 11,000 years later. It's a little bit mind blowing when you get into the the big picture stuff. But that's the really cool thing about space, Tim, because it doesn't matter who you are, where you live on the Earth, or what you believe in. You step away from that campfire that you're all gathered around one night and just look up. You're going to ask yourself those big questions, about life, the universe, and everything. And you're going to question, whether the answer is 42 or what it is, because, space is there for everyone. My personal philosophy is it's a test. It's a test for the human race to elevate themselves a little bit off, shooting each other and go and do something a little bit more amazing. But that's probably a conversation for a glass of wine at the break, I suppose. All righty, let's move on, folks. What else is up there? Has anyone heard of something called a globular cluster? Well, a globular cluster is literally, it's kind of a hangout for stars. So in this one, this is Omega Centauri. This is the biggest one in the Milky Way, and we're lucky in the Southern Hemisphere, we get to see it. We're talking about 10 million stars hanging out together. This is like, the green room for stars, because they're all bunched up together. They all want to be there at the same time. And they're just mesmerizing things because they look like a big, bright, fuzzy star, and they look fantastic through a telescope. But when you actually get a bit of magnification on it, you can literally start picking out individual stars. And my gosh, there are just so many of them. There's 2 or 3.
Are they static or moving apart?
Well, they're kind of moving in orbit around each other. So it appears static from our point of view, but in the big picture space kind of stuff, they are literally gravitationally attracted to each other. So they're kind of orbiting around one another. Here's another one. It's called 47 Tucano. It's got a very strange name because originally it was thought to be the 47th star in the constellation Tucano, but when somebody pointed a telescope at it, they thought, whoa, look at that. It's It's actually a globular cluster, and it's absolutely stunning to look at this one through a scope. So should you ever get the chance to get yourself out to a dark site, and ask them to point the telescope at a globular cluster for you, because you won't be disappointed, because these things look really cool. What else we got? We better talk a little bit about emission nebulae, and the disclaimer here is no, that's not my photograph. As you probably know, that's a Hubble shot. And yes, we're all certainly looking forward to seeing some results from the James Webb next week. But in the meantime, the Hubble brought, I guess, a lot of cosmology to the masses, and has done for the best part of 30 or 40 years. And what we're looking at here is a close-up of something called the Eagle Nebula. And these pillars of dust that we're seeing here, this is a star-forming nursery. And stars are formed when there are three things. When you've got dust, you've got heat, and you've got gravity. Get that combination right, and stars become born within that area. And then as the young stars, then these protostars, as they call them, emerge from their stellar cocoons, the solar winds that they generate then propel these dusts around them into different shapes that we see here. So it's quite fascinating. All the while, they're emitting different elements which glow, which we can record and photograph at specific wavelengths. And that's where we get into this whole hydrogen alpha thing that we touched on earlier, because that's the most common one. And I'll show you what we're talking about specifically. So here's a graphic showing the visible spectrum of light. And if you liken this to a piano keyboard, you've got your bass notes down there at near the ultraviolet end, past blue, where it's 400 nanometers, all the way up to, very red and infrared past 700 nanometers. Well, you can see where hydrogen alpha is there. It's towards the end of the visible spectrum. So if you wanted to shoot something and see hydrogen alpha, you're obviously going to need either a modified camera or one with a particular hydrogen alpha filter. So a lot of modified Astro DSLRs, they take away the what they call the IR cut filter, which is the filter that enables it to be able to use terrestrially, which filters out both ends of the spectrum. By removing that filter, you can obviously expose yourself to a lot more different emissions. The reason we're going to bang on a little bit about hydrogen alpha is that it's really cool stuff to photograph, and I'll show you why. So if I take a black and white image, and my camera has a black and white mono sensor, and if I shoot using a hydrogen alpha filter, I can shoot from my backyard here in Burwood in Melbourne, light pollution central. I'm only 10 kilometres from the city, but I can filter out the moon, I can filter out street lights, and I can just capture the light that's emitted by some stars and that nebula. And what you're seeing is what they call nebulosity, and that's all that wispy, cloudy stuff. If we shot that with a more conventional camera in colour, well, you can see there's a whole lot of information there that's kind of missing because of the hydrogen alpha filter. Combine those two, however, and suddenly we start getting a much more interesting result of what we call a HARGB image, which is, I guess, not only scientifically relevant because we get a sense of what we're looking at from the composition of it now, but it's also aesthetically quite pretty. And so we like to take a lot of these things using these filters in space. So I'll show you a few more of these. So this is a close-up of something called the GEM cluster. It's called the GEM cluster because it's a very beautiful little star cluster. Stars are born, I guess, hot and blue, and then as they age, they eventually change color and they become yellow until eventually they reach the end of their life and become a red giant. There's a few red giants in this image where you can see these big orange stars. And I guess that's just giving you a sense that there are some older stars mixed up with some hot young stars there. So it's a little bit like, contestants on The Voice or something like that. You've got, hot young stars and some old ones there. But the red in the background is the hydrogen alpha. if we pull back a little bit, different telescope, go a bit wider on this one, we can show you a different kind of a star-forming region. It's called a cometary globule. Nothing to do with a comet. It just happens to look a bit comet-shaped, which is why they call it that. But they call this one the Hand of God. It looks a bit like a sandworm from Arrakis and Dune, if you happen to have watched that recent movie. Reaching out to gobble a galaxy there. Of course, the galaxy's, way in the distance behind the object, but it's a pretty cool shaped thing to photograph. And that's one of the things that attracts me about this hobby. There's some really cool stuff up there in space to photograph. And I shot that one from Tasmania. And here's a tip, folks. If you ever want to take your family on a holiday to Tasmania and you got, kids, don't take the Spirit of Tasmania. Not if you insist on taking your telescope and it's got to fit in the back of the car. And, that's why we're taking the car, the Spirit. We're not flying because everyone got seasick. And yeah, I wasn't too popular for a while there. It was a nice holiday. Check this one out, guys. This is the single biggest, longest exposure I've done ever. And this one photograph took 6 months to take. Can you imagine that? 6 months to take one photo. So why did I spend an entire season photographing this thing? Well, first of all, it's the only high-res color photograph that's ever been taken of this region of space. I know that's nuts, right? There's like 50 or 100,000 astrophotographers worldwide, but no one has actually shot this thing because no one knew it was there. I was poring over a supercosmos hydrogen alpha survey of Milky Way, and I saw this kind of faint shape. I thought that could be an interesting thing to shoot, but little did I realize that the reason people haven't photographed it is because it's really faint and really big. So this is a 6-panel mosaic. And by 6 panels, I'm talking about you divide that by literally 6 quadrants. That's how many different sections of that I'd have to assemble together to make it fit. And so what we're looking at here is a supernova remnant. So a very long time ago, a star, the very tiny star you see in the center there, exploded in supernova and scattered its stuff all over the heavens. And it continues to do so. This thing's moving at something like 500,000 kilometers an hour, but it didn't have a galactic catalog number. It didn't have anything that I could find that was relevant to it. Eventually, after a whole lot of Googling and digging, I found a scientific research paper that said it was, RCW 114, whatever it was. But when I finally got around to publishing it, I submitted it to NASA and they thought, we'll have that, thanks very much. And they published it and it got like 2 million hits on their website that day, which is pretty cool considering this is something that, I shot from my own little backyard. But it just goes to show that citizens can contribute a little bit to the world of science if you're crazy enough. Got to be crazy to do this. Just talking a little bit more about narrowband imaging, and that's using these filters that I was just touching on. So this is a classic narrowband image, not dissimilar to what you might have seen from the Hubble. And this is one of mine that it's not far from us. This is in the Carina region, so it's one of the big bright ones near us. But how do we take a picture like this? How do we get these wacky colors? What are we looking at? Well, I'll show you, because then it'll make it a bit easier when you go and look at these pictures. So here's a graphic showing on the top what you might see through a red, a green, or a blue filter, using that same showing that same visible light spectrum as we showed you earlier. Now, we showed you hydrogen alpha on the bottom there. You'll see at 650 nanometers, that's where the hydrogen alpha is sitting. Now, there are 2 other elements that are often photographed. One is ionized sulfur, and that's to the right of the hydrogen alpha. That's very red. And then to the left, midway between blue and green, is ionized oxygen. So what the Hubble people did was they realized that we can't really go shooting in black and white because we're not going to be able to tell what's what. And if we shot this in these colors, and we literally assign the hydrogen alpha to red and the sulfur to very red and the oxygen to kind of a bluey greeny color, then we wouldn't actually be able to really tell the chemical composition of the nebula we're looking at. So they do this. They assign the ionized sulfur to red. They assign, excuse me, they assign the hydrogen alpha to green. And they assign the ionized oxygen to blue. And with that, they can then build a false color image that is scientifically valid, that enables them to determine the chemical composition of a nebula. And of course, we can do all of this under light pollution, under the full moon, because we're filtering out streetlights and light pollution, etc. So let me break that down and give you a practical example. So here is the hydrogen alpha filter of a nebula. So you can see lots of dust, lots of nebulosity, lots going on. If we, however, use the ionized oxygen filter, which filters out everything except the 500 nanometer wavelength of ionized oxygen, we don't see a lot there. Oops, sorry, went too fast. I might just show you that one again because it's. I think you'll get a better feel for that if I show you that one more time. So bear with me 2 seconds, guys. Okay. Ionized oxygen. There we go. That's what I was trying to show you. So that pool in the middle, that little gaseous pool there, that is all hot young stars being born. That's literally a star-forming nursery of incredible heat. This is through the ionized sulfur filter, which is showing you the shock fronts where the hydrogen alpha and the ionized oxygen are meeting. And there's quite a delineated special shape there. Now, if you turn your head on its side, you might see a profile of a Chilean poet called Gabriele Mistral. You might not. But when I show that to you in color, when we assemble these now as a single color image, this is kind of what the Hubble does. So this is very typical. You get the blues, the golden tones, and you get purple stars, which in my opinion look ghastly. But then I'm a photographer and I like aesthetics. So I'll take that same data and I'll take that to Photoshop and I'll run it through selective color and turn it into this, which I think is, you'd agree, is a little bit more appealing. And now we get a real sense that there's a fiery desert there of hydrogen alpha. There's a cool lagoon of ionized oxygen, and you can see where the shock fronts are where they meet. And that's the basis of what we call false color or narrowband imaging. And I do a lot of that mainly because of my location here in Burwood, because I don't often get the chance to run off and play in the country. That said, it also means I can express creativity. I can kind of work with a few interesting color palettes and yet still create scientifically valid images. And that's the latest version of that same object shot through the big Takahashi scope. And you can really see the dust in there and all the different elements that they tend to show pretty well. So there you go. If we pull back a little bit further on that one, we'll show you the entirety of what's called the Great Nebula in Carina. And this is a 7-panel mosaic. This one only took me 4 months to shoot. Crazy, huh? Way up at the top right, you'll see that same gem cluster that I showed you earlier. And then below that is the Gabriele Mistral. But now you can get a sense of the entire thing. This is the largest emission nebula in the Milky Way. We're lucky that it's right above our heads. It's a great target for amateur astrophotographers because it's big and it's bright and it's bold and it's easy to find. That said, it's got some pretty amazing things in it, including the Eta Carina star itself, which is the most likely candidate, they say, to be the next supernova. May or may not happen in our lifetimes. But it's something to, I don't know if you look forward to it or not, but it'd be kind of cool. And my software tells me there's 188,000 stars in that image. So there's that old saying that there are more stars in the sky than there are grains of sand on all the beaches in all the earth. I reckon that's not far from the truth, because there are just mind-blowing numbers of stars up there. All righty. Here's a close-up of the Carina Nebula itself, and that is the brightest star in the middle there. That is the supergiant Eta Carina itself, and that's the one that I mentioned that perhaps may be the next candidate for a supernova. And this is, relatively local. This is, this is only 8,500 light years away. It's, just down the road, really. Now, do you remember how I showed you those different wavelengths of light? And I said it wouldn't make a lot of sense if we actually were to map a red filter on the hydrogen alpha and a redder filter on the ionized sulfur and a kind of a blue-green filter on the oxygen. Well, naturally, being a curious chap, I thought, well, what would happen if I actually did that? So I thought I might show you what happens in natural narrowband, if you like. And this is the reason that the Hubble doesn't do this, because suddenly it all becomes a little bit amorphous. And it's quite difficult to really determine, particularly where the hydrogen alpha and the ionized sulfur separate themselves, because they're kind of pinky red and, well, deeper red, really. It's pretty, but it doesn't really tell you as much. I'll give you another example of that, where here we've got our old friend here, the running chicken nebula. And I was lucky enough to win something called the Save a Star competition with one of these images, which is a competition that it was new. They had their first go last year. It was run out of Salt Lake City in Utah. And they had entrants from 36 countries, some thousands and thousands of entries. And I was lucky enough to be the grand prize winner for that one, which is kind of cool. So here is that same image mapped in what we might call natural narrowband. In other words, if we were to have our own Starship Enterprise and we were able to zoom out there and open the view screen and pop that up, that's what our eyes might see with the more visible spectrum of light. So it's still pretty, and it's a nice image, just a little bit different. Incidentally, can anyone see the crocodile there down the bottom with its jaws open? No one can see the crocodile. No one here has been to Darwin. Oh, there you go. Hang on. Ron's seen it. He's good. Down the bottom, you'll see this big snappy looking crocodile. It's very cool. Anyway, we digress. All right, Tim, this might be a good time to charge your wine glasses. Because this is kind of a bit over halfway point.
So this is the end of part one.
So what do you guys want to do? You want to take a little break, ask some questions, watch the footy? I don't know. You tell me.
I think we take a 5-minute break, and if there's any questions in the interim, if you're happy to field them,
yep,
we can do that. Then reconvene. What are we at now? We're at
8:30.
So we resume at 8:35.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
All right.
So most of the colours when you see the Milky Way, if you go out in the outback Australia, you don't get to see the colours bit. You have to do interpretive coloration.
Not necessarily. If you look through a telescope with your own naked eye, the thing about our eyes is they're made up of something called rods and cones. And the rods are the detectors of light, and they're quite sensitive. They enable us to see black or white. But if you want to actually see colour, you need to fire up your cones. Now, our cones are not nearly as sensitive. And that's why at night time, when we see stuff, we rarely see it in colour, unless you shine a bright light or something on it. So you go out in the outback and you look up at the Milky Way, you're not going to see very much color at all, simply because of the limitation of our eyes. You look through a really bright telescope and you might see a little tiny bit of color, but ultimately, the reason that any camera will pick up all the colors is because it's just because of the time exposure factor. It's just a lot more sensitive. And so you'll see a lot more color, be it natural color or actual generated color, as I've shown you just there. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah. So when you get a 20-second exposure or several of them, and blend them all together, you're able to pick up colours at that level, or you really do need to get into
so Terry, essentially that's what we do. We don't just take one photograph all night. We take a series of what we call sub-exposures. So we'll take maybe 5-minute exposures or 10-minute exposures, and we'll take a night full of them, and then we'll stack them together.
Yeah.
Because then we'll get a better, clearer signal to noise ratio, where the noise is reduced and the clarity becomes more obvious and more of the detail becomes more obvious. And of course, eventually that means we get a bit more color coming through as well.
Yeah, amazing.
So yeah, but don't let that dissuade you from getting out there and photographing the night sky. You know,
I had one brilliant experience out the back of Coonabarabran.
Yep.
You know, we're middle of the night, no moon, and pulled over the side of the road, driving somewhere to actually take a driving break, and looked up, and it was just without a moon. The sky was so bright with Milky Way.
Fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, the terrifying thing is there's people on this earth who've never seen the Milky Way.
Yeah.
You know, if you live in Taipei or Hong Kong or New York or any of those really mega cities that, and maybe you don't leave, you'll be lucky to see a star, let alone the glory of the Milky Way above your head.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It is.
So we're going up to outback Queensland, and I'm hoping to find some spots up there out near Longreach.
Fantastic.
Where you get a good star view. So
yeah, you'll be spoiled out there.
And this is the season for it, isn't it? Is it July? Is this the good season for the Milky Way, or
anywhere from May through to August? After that, the Milky Way tends to tail off a little bit, and we enter a bit of a sort of a black hole where there's not much to actually photograph out there except galaxies. So yeah, when are you going?
Next week.
Oh, you'll be right. You'll be right.
That'll be good.
That's a good time to go.
They're stunning photographs you got there. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
Andy, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Newtonian versus refracting.
Yep.
I used to be the proud owner of a 3-inch Casco Newtonian telescope, and all the big ones, all the large ones like the Anglo-Australian telescope, are all Newtonian style. Is that purely because of the focal length, or?
Some of them are Newtonians. A lot of them are what they call a SCT, which is a Schmidt-Cassegrain design.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a kind of a folded telescope where your light travels down and hits the primary mirror and then travels up to a secondary mirror, a little bit like a Newtonian. Yeah. A Newtonian then spits that light out to the camera, but with the Schmidt-Cassegrains, the light is then reflected straight back down through the center of the primary mirror. And the reason they do that, the folded telescope design, is that it means they can get very, very long focal length in a compact tube.
Yeah.
So the downside of that is just the inverse square law of light. Every time the light travels and bounces off something, you lose some of it.
Mm.
So with a Newtonian, where the light hits that mirror, bounces up to a secondary mirror, and then on your camera, it means that it's quite efficient. Whereas when the light travels all the way down, travels all the way back up, and then travels all the way back down to your camera again, you're losing a couple of stops every time.
Yeah. Okay.
Whereas with a refractor, what you see is what you get. Literally, it's just light coming at one end and camera at the other. You're only limited by the actual aperture, as in how big a refractor you might have. And you might have seen pictures of old refractors back in the day where they're literally 20 meters long. And obviously that's not very practical.
So also I think it would be a physical limitation of being able to grind the lenses, the size of it, and being able to get it accurate.
Yeah, and the price.
And the price.
Yeah, the price is significant. But we all start somewhere with something.
I resume. We're just settling down the wild crowds here so that they can pay attention to you, Andy.
That's right, mate. We're just chatting and filling in time.
So
are we back?
We're back. We're ready for action. Part two.
See that word on the screen there?
Pareidolia.
Pareidolia. Who knows what that's all about?
It looks like a face.
There you go.
That's right. Seeing
there
stuff.
You go. All right. So cast your mind back to when you're a little boy or a little girl, all those years ago, and you lie back on the grass and you look up at the clouds and you think, oh, I see a bunny rabbit, or, oh, I see an airplane. That's our mind just wanting to make sense out of what it sees as a reference to a known, I guess, entity. So what happens when we see something like this back in 1976 from the Viking orbiter around Mars, and suddenly the world's gone, there's Martians, there's life on Mars, oh my gosh, look at that. And of course, it was literally just a trick of the light, because other vehicles taking the same region from different orbiting heights at different seasons just showed that actually there's no face on Mars, but it looks cool. And that was before, the internet, Facebook and Instagram, but it was enough to get people's attention and get people excited. What do we see when we see this one? Is that the universe?
American road sign. Yeah.
Flicking us the bird?
The finger of God.
Exactly. Well, actually, they call that one the finger of God, so well done. Or this one here. This one's pretty well known.
The Horsehead Nebula.
The famous Horsehead Nebula. It's one of the few that actually looks like what they called it. But we talked about this stuff earlier in terms of referencing it to the price of a boat. Well, that particular image is taken by a mate of mine, and he was pretty serious. He's got a remote-controlled observatory in rural Victoria, and he's got a dome. And the dome is remote controlled and it has weather sensors. So literally it will know that, yes, it's dark. Yes, it's clear. No, it's not going to rain. I'm going to open up it's going to open the dome up now. It'll send the telescope up to whatever target it's supposed to go at. Drive the telescope there, tell it what filters to use, etc. And if the clouds come over, it'll detect that there's clouds. So it'll stop taking images. If rain is coming, it'll detect, oh, it's gonna rain. It'll close the dome and park everything. Meanwhile, my buddy Steve, who owns all this, he's just sitting in his lounge room, watching Netflix with his wife while this thing's doing all this stuff. It's a very big boat. That's a 6-figure boat. Yeah.
Millions.
But there you go.
It's probably good that it's remote so his wife can't see what he spent it on.
He's a company director. I'm sure he's got it figured out. What do you see when you see this one, team?
Dragon. It's like an old face.
I see the Starship Enterprise.
That's good. That's good. Someone had a dragon. That was close.
We had a crab as well.
A crab. All right.
Maybe a prawn.
How about a wolf? Can anyone see a wolf in there?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Can you see his nose and his mouth open and his little ears and his paws underneath?
Yeah,
well,
it's more like a
barking at the top.
prawn.
Well, they call this one the Wolf Nebula. So it's just a bunch of hydrogen alpha that has lit up this dust in front of it. And that's just one of these amazing shapes that's out there that, somebody thought, gee, that looks like a wolf. And I guess it's stuck. So they now call that one officially the Wolf Nebula. There's a thing called the International Astronomy Photographer of the Year. They've recently announced the shortlist for this year. This was a finalist a couple of years ago. That's kind of the biggest competition for astrophotographers currently in the world. It's run by the Greenwich Observatory in England. They get roughly 5,000 entrants from all over the world every year, and I was lucky enough to feature twice in 2 years in that one. Missed out this year, but next year perhaps.
So did the Aborigines have any history in here of stargazing that named any of these areas?
There's a chap named Dwayne Hamaker, and Dwayne's just recently released a book about first Australian astronomers. Quite fascinating stuff because they don't have a written language as such. They have more of a spoken word language, and they literally pass down the knowledge of 40,000 years from generation to generation. But it's actually been proven that the Aboriginals saw and recognised variable stars, so stars that changed colour. They saw, you might have seen something called the emu, which is a Milky Way where the head of the Milky Way looks a little bit like an emu's head. They don't so much look at what the stars are. They look at the spaces between the stars where there are dark shapes. Now, the interesting thing about the emu is that the Aboriginals know that when the emu is at a certain point in the sky, that's when they can go and harvest emu eggs, because apparently emu eggs, there's a time to harvest them where they're, not quite ready, and when there's a time to harvest them, then when they've gone too far in the fertilization process. But the Aboriginals were smart enough to work out that, when the emu in the sky is at a certain point, that's when you get your emu eggs, and so on and so forth. Dwayne has spent most of his recent life studying Aboriginal astronomy, and it's quite fascinating. It's something I'd urge you to have a look at what they've done.
They've got that out of Sea Lake, haven't they? Where I think there's a guy went up in the 1890s and talked to the local Aborigines, and then presented a paper at the Geographic Society down in Melbourne.
Okay.
So that's put that on record as to, because he spoke to all the elders up there, and he wrote down their history. So, and then did the presentation. So that's back in the 1890s.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, very under-recognised, the contribution of first Australians to astronomy. Moving off to a slightly different thing here. What can you see in this one, folks?
Tiger by from a call from the back of the room.
Okay. What else can you see? I might give you a little hint here. Our American cousins had the 4th of July recently. Did somebody say Statue of Liberty?
Yeah, we've got a Statue of Liberty in the middle.
There you go. Well, this one's called the Statue of Liberty Nebula.
Well done.
So well done. This one is it's not so far from us. It's pretty close to the Carina Nebula. It's kind of funny that the Statue of Liberty Nebula can't be seen by Americans. But there you go. Now, here's a cool thing that we can do. We've got some pretty sophisticated AI software nowadays, and what we can do is we can actually remove the stars from these images. And when you remove the stars, suddenly the nebulosity and the shapes and the twists and the gases, well, without those pesky stars in the way, we get to see a lot more of the shape and form that's in there. Now, I know we talked about this looking like the Statue of Liberty, but can anyone see the keyboard player from Duran Duran there? With his arm up in the air and he's about to pound down and, sing Planet Earth. So
looks like a salt lake, Tim.
Yes, a bit like a salt lake.
There you go. There you go. All right. So this chunk of sky, and this photograph's by a Kiwi called Matthew Ludgate. This chunk of sky is called the Vela Supernova Remnant. It's a huge area of the sky that's a fascinating place to shoot, because what we're looking at here is a supernova that exploded 11,000 years ago and went kaboom and literally scattered its star stuff all over the universe. And what's happening here is we're seeing stellar material being ejected at superheated temperatures, and it's going so fast that when it hits dust, it radiates that dust. It irradiates the dust and it makes it glow and it becomes very, very hot. So all these blue bits that you see, this is all ionized oxygen, superheated dust areas, but they're all quite beautiful. And if we look up way on the top right-hand side at 3 o'clock there's a little pointy bit there that looks a little bit like a Concorde. That's something called Herschel's ray. And just to give you some scale, we talked earlier about the nearest star being close on 4 light years away. Well, that particular little pointy bit on the right, that's 5 light years long. Oof. So if you can imagine, Alpha Centauri at one end and the Earth at the other, that just gives you a little bit of a sense of the scale of what we're looking at here. Quite dazzling. Now, needless to say, I don't have the equipment that Matthew has. So here he's shot this with, I think, a 135mm lens or something equivalent on a DSLR, so very wide field of view. But with my telescope, I can isolate little bits of this, which I find in its own right quite appealing and attractive. So here's the centerpiece. This is what they call the sting of Vela. And again, it's just amazing to think that these shock fronts, this is stuff traveling at 500,000 kilometers an hour as it goes through across the heavens. This one is Herschel's ray itself. So this is a close-up of that Concorde-like shape that I showed you before. Very beautiful little target, this one. Little, 5 light years long. What did we say that was? That's 50 trillion kilometers long. So that's only a little one. Yeah.
So with your Astro competitions, if you take the stars out, is that a legitimate image?
Oh, it is definitely. There's not so much a class, Tim, for starless images, but starless images are a little bit in vogue at the moment because it's a kind of a popular thing to do, but at the same time...
Haven't you got a creative category in astrophotography?
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. I mean,
But you're making stuff up anyway with the colour that you attribute to the wavelength.
Well, effectively, but what we're seeing on this particular one, these are true colours. So all we're looking at here is ionised oxygen, which is blue, and we're looking at hydrogen alpha, which is red. So the colours are actually real. They call this one the Mustache Nebula for obvious reasons. And this is just a beautiful little bolt of like a gossamer-like silk in its sort of presence. A bit devastating, really, when you think it's more like the Nexus wave sort of shooting across the sky, wiping out everything in its path, but it's pretty. Incidentally, we talked about double stars and triple stars earlier. That one up at the top left there, that's Sahel. That's actually a quadruple star, Sahel al-Munif, as named by ancient Arab sailors. So that's where you've literally got 4 stars orbiting around each other, hanging out together. Pretty cool. And this was just a little piece of Vela that I liked. I thought it looked a bit like a blue chili, so I called it the Blue Chili Nebula. It did quite well at one of the awards as well. But it was just a random piece of the sky that I kind of liked the look of within that massive area of Vela. Moving forward. All right. I'm just going to show you a couple of things now. By the way, you guys getting anything out of this? You all right? You're not falling asleep yet?
Yeah, it's stunning. Keep going.
All right.
I think Ian's having trouble.
So when you look up at the Milky Way from a dark site, you'll see two big fuzzy blobs up there. And they're the Magellanic Clouds, so named by Ferdinand Magellan when he first circumnavigated the globe 500 odd years ago. And he looked up and he thought, oh, look at that. And these are companion galaxies to the Milky Way. They're irregular galaxies. By saying irregular, they're just not the same classic spiral shape as many of the others. And the reason they're irregular is because of the sheer amount of gravity from the Milky Way in its close proximity. It's bent and twisted these out of shape. And as a result, all of the little nebulas within them are also bent and twisted into really wacky shapes. But as a result, they're fascinating things to photograph. So that one there, that's a natural photograph, if you like. So just using conventional DSLR, you just get to see a little bit of the hydrogen alpha there and the red bits. But if we now get the same target and we shoot that in narrowband, suddenly all these little wacky twisted bits become a little bit more apparent, and we get a little bit of that spiral form coming through. You can see that sort of swirl reverse letter S form coming through there. And all those little nebulas, they're stunning things to photograph. So I'll take you on a quick tour through a couple of those as we go now. So I won't spend too long on these, but this is the biggest one. It's called the Tarantula Nebula. And if you look through a telescope at this, it literally does look like a bright spider in the sky. And that's the hot bit at the roundabout sort of 3 o'clock there. Sorry, 3 o'clock? No, 6 o'clock, I beg your pardon. Wait a minute, rewind. Sorry, COVID brain fog. 9 o'clock. Okay, there we go. That's the brightest bit. They reckon if that was as close as the Orion Nebula, we would see shadows at night because it's that big and it's that bright.
Oh.
It's a pretty cool target though. This is only 160,000 light years away, so it's reasonably local.
So when you're exposing for that, you have the same issue of controlling brights and
big time. Yeah, big time. Sometimes we take a whole bunch of long exposures to get the out of detail, and then we get some shorter exposures, and then we layer the results to get the best result possible.
Yeah. So blending your exposures. Yeah.
So you don't burn out the core as such.
Yeah.
This one's called the Hookah Pipe Nebula because it looks a little bit like one of those Egyptian things that gentlemen sit in cafes in Cairo and smoke. But there's also
smoke rings.
But yeah, isn't that smoke ring cool? That little smoke ring up at the top right there. It's just like what the.
And you obviously don't use F22 to get your starburst.
No, not quite. Not quite.
That's right.
Just some of these wacky shapes and bizarre things that are out there. This one reminded me a little bit of Saint-Saëns, the Carnival of the Animals. Just bizarre things. There's more of them. As I said, it's just incredible looking at these twisted, wacky shapes that are up there in the Large Magellanic Cloud. Great, great places to find targets. This one, I call this one the Wacky Races because it reminded me of Dick Dastardly and and all those crazy cartoon cars that were from that era. But a little bit of interest here. There's a thing here called a Wolf-Rayet star. So if you look in the center towards the top, on the left, you'll see this very circular blue patch. And excuse me, what you're looking at there is called a Wolf-Rayet star. And there's a little tiny star right in the middle of that circle of gas. Well, that circle of gas, that's literally traveling at millions of kilometers an hour in like this crazy cosmic cyclone around the star, purely because it's just this superheated gas that's gathered up so much speed and energy that it's literally spun itself into this bizarre circular pattern. And I'll show you a couple of other, or maybe one other wacky thing that happens when you've got a Wolf-Rayet star. And I'll get to that in just a sec. This one I call the Tassie Devil because it reminded me a little bit of the Bugs Bunny character, just that swirl of crazy animation and motion. And what else we got here?
You got a bad case of pareidolia there, Anne.
Yeah, I do. It happens all the time. And it's going to get worse. I'll just warn you right now. So with this little super bubble here, the more of this thing, with that thing's mouth, if you like, that's 250 light years across. How crazy is that? But I'm not the only one with this pareidolia thing. A mate of mine called Mike Sidonio, Strongman Mike. He's a astrophotographer in Canberra whose work I admire. And how cool is this? This guy has just built the highest observatory in Australia on one of the mountains surrounding Canberra. He's like 2,500 meters up, I think it is. Anyway, his photograph, he's annotated it for us here, of the same thing. And how's all this? Look at all the stuff that he's found in there. He's got the crazy frogmouth guy. He's got a gremlin. He's got Admiral Akbar up there, downhill races. He's got one of the Muppet dudes. There's a bunny rabbit in there and all kinds of stuff. And so it's not just me who's got this thing going on. All right. Let me show you this Wolf Rayet star I was talking about before. Check this out. How cool is that? So this, ignore the big bright yellow star at the top. Look at the star just below it, which is the fairly innocuous looking whitish blue one. Well, that star's had a little bit of a coronary, if you like. It's had a little bit of a kind of a cosmic heart attack, and it's thrown this shell around itself. This is kind of a pre-supernova event, if you like, where it's literally thrown this shell of ionized oxygen around itself. So you can only get this using an ionized oxygen filter, and it's dim as you can imagine. It's just really, really hard to shoot this thing. But with a lot of exposure and a lot of patience, you get the full bubble shape, which somebody thinks looks a little bit like a dolphin. But it reminds me a little bit more of The Flight of the Navigator, if you remember the 1980s movie, Coming into Dock. It's just really cool, bizarre, wacky thing that's out there in space. And, it's whatever it is, 40 light years across or something stupid like that. Crazy stuff. All right. What do we got? We got last one. Let's finish on a good one, shall we? All right. We talked about supernovas. We talked about dying stars. We talked about stars being born. And this is a star that's had a nice, gentle, natural death. A little bit like what our star's going to do, because to go supernova, a star's got to be really, really big. And it's got to have some titanic forces within it to make it kind of go kaboom. Whereas most stars, they don't do that. They just go through their life cycle of being born young and hot and blue, and then they get to a point where they start getting yellow like ours is now, and then they get a little bit, they start expanding into these red giants as they burn off the hydrogen within. And then eventually what's going to happen is that hydrogen is going to then dissipate, and it's going to collapse down on itself, which is that orange area you see in this image. And then it's created a shell around itself of ionized oxygen, and then that collapses down upon itself eventually. So we're seeing two collapses here, one 6,500 years ago, one 12,000 years ago, which is why one is orange and one is blue. Yes, it looks like an eye. But then eventually what you've got is this brown dwarf or possibly neutron star right in the middle, and that's all that's left. So this is literally a time capsule of the death throes of this star in Aquarius, which they call the Eye of God or the Helix Nebula. And it's quite a beautiful thing, really hard to shoot to get those extremities of the outer regions, these chevrons, if you like, of hydrogen alpha. I think I clocked it, they were coming down at about 1 pixel an hour. At one point, separating that out from the sky glow here in Melbourne was a challenge. But the image did very well. It was a finalist in the International Astronomy Photographer of the Year. It got an A-pod. Kind of put me on the map a little bit as being a astrophotographer of some recognition, I guess. And you're looking at 75 hours of data, so probably 3 or 4 months to shoot that one. But it did well, and it looked cool, and NASA liked it, so they published it. Should you like to see any more of these pieces or follow me on my journey, just jump onto the links here. You can see me at andysastro.com. Follow me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram. Occasionally I pop up YouTube videos. And for those who are really keen, we do a little bit of one-on-one mentoring, with particularly in processing of astro images. And I know it's probably been a rough night out there, but I'd like to thank you all for coming and, sharing the journey of, what's out there.
That's fantastic.
And thanks so much for having me tonight.
Excellent.
Our pleasure. Yeah.
Really spectacular. Thank you, Andy.
I think there's a few people checking their bank balances at the moment.
Now.
So what happens if we get a supernova goes off near us with one of those shells of blue cloud spreading out in our direction?
Look, it's probably not.
Goes out.
I was going to say it's probably not something any of us would be prepared for, to know what sort of an effect that will have on us. The likelihood, though, is that whatever would happen would affect us all at once, and we probably wouldn't get a lot of notice.
I think you might lose your internet connection.
I think that's likely.
It'll take the Starlink network off first.
Exactly. It's it's crazy stuff just to think what.
So when was the last visible? Was it the Chinese saw it or something?
The last supernova?
Yeah.
They actually pop up relatively frequently. They're usually in very distant galaxies. I think there was one in one of the big barred spiral, the Great Barred Spiral, NGC 1365 from memory. That might have been last year. But we're talking like so far away, so distant that cosmically it's just not going to affect us. If Eta Carina goes, we'll know about it.
Andy, I've got a question for you. Your images are extraordinary and fascinating, and I've very much enjoyed watching all of them. But do you have any thoughts and guidance for those of us who don't have any specialized equipment, just a normal range of good photographic equipment, but would like to go out in the night, an appropriate night, and take a few photographs of the sky as to where we might start and what we should do, and exposure settings and so forth?
Absolutely. There's a really good guide that a friend of mine has written. His name's Phil Hart, and it's called Shooting Stars, and it's designed for exactly what you're talking about. And what I'll do, if you like, I'll pop the link in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great,
Michael, and you can download it. I think it'll cost you about $20, worth every cent, because it's there's 100 pages or something of valuable information there on how to shoot star trails with your DSLR, or how to shoot nightscapes and so on and so forth. And he's broken it down in a very user-friendly way where you can understand it. He's got all the settings there. I've actually done a couple of workshops with Phil where he's taken people with their DSLRs, and I've spoken about my thing, and it's been a nice synergy.
All right, well, I accept that, and I can do that. But from your point of view tonight, what were the top 2 or 3 things that you would have to say to us as to where to start on that approach?
First of all, you might want to consider grab yourself a dew heater or some hand warmers, because when you go out there at night and you start spending a bit of time out there, first thing is probably going to happen is your lens is going to fog up.
Yeah.
Second thing that's likely to happen is your battery's going to cark itself, because the batteries aren't designed for cold weather or long exposures. So get yourself a spare battery. I'm just getting Phil's thing here just while I'm talking to you.
So do you jump into a star tracker?
Look, you can. It's probably worthwhile if you want to get that, Milky Way imagery looking really good.
So when you're talking really good, it's just the sharpness. So you get a sharper image by tracking.
Yeah, because like, what is the 1/500th rule where you can shoot? Sorry, just trying to remember how that works out. It's like a 500th of a second if you're pointing at the pole, and then a little bit less as you go further away from the pole because the movement of the stars is less, etc., etc.
But essentially 15 seconds with a wide angle lens. Yep.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Let me just grab the chat here so I can get this to work. Now, I did stop sharing, didn't I? So I'm just trying to find out where the chat's gone.
No, we've still got the nebula on the screen.
Oh, let me stop sharing then in that case, my bad. That's why I can't see the chat. Okay. Thank you for that. That's, by the way, it's called the Lagoon Nebula, that one. A little bit of Eustace trivia for you. Okay, stop share. There we go. Now we've got the chat up. Okay, so let's see if that types in there. Okay, so just if you have a look on the, there's a link there on Phil Hart on his Shooting Stars ebook. So jump into that.
So for the normal of us, Mike, you probably want to get down to like an f2.8 lens, f2.8 or better, 1.4 if you've got some of the portrait lenses work quite well, but f2.8, and you're going to be an ISO setting of around 3200, and you're going to be exposing from 15 to 25 seconds, somewhere there. And then
the one thought, the question I had is, we've done a little bit of that, Tim, from previous times, but using wide-angle lenses, can a mere mortal aspire to use a telephoto lens to get close up into these great things in the sky, or are you really stuck with wide angle?
Yeah,
look, you can put it on a star tracker with a wide angle lens. Sorry, with a telephoto lens.
Sky tracker is.
Sky tracker is like a little baby mount that literally tracks in RA. It literally tracks the rotation of the Earth.
So you set it on the end of your tripod, and it actually moves at the same speed as the stars. So
okay. So if you don't want to buy specialized equipment, then you can't do it.
No, you just got to shoot for a shorter time to allow for the movement. So I've shot with my 200mm Nikon f2.8 into the core of the Milky Way and got a reasonable shot. But you just have to crank up the ISO and reduce the speed that you're going to take the image for.
So Andy,
isn't there also some radial blend in Photoshop where you can actually blend, half a dozen 20-second shots?
Yep. Yeah, a median stack.
That's it. Yeah, median stack.
Andy, what would be the cost of an entry-level tracker just to mount your DSLR with a long lens on it?
Less than $2,000. From memory, around sort of 1,500 or thereabouts, from what I can recall.
And that way you can program in where you want to point it. It'll automatically go there.
Oh, you'll still have to do what they call polar align it, where you align it with the southern celestial pole. But once you get your head around how to do that, that's a good thing. But inevitably, you'll be using pretty wide-angle lenses. So, and the reason most people use wide-angle lenses is because they're quite dramatic. Recently, I mentioned I won that Save a Star competition. So I've got a camera for sale soon. It's unused. It's a modified EOS R. Comes with a wide-angle 15mm lens. So, if anyone wants a really nice camera for doing this wide-angle stuff, I'll have one for sale very shortly.
That's a Canon, is it?
It's a Canon EOS R, that's right.
Oh, Mike, you're in business.
And it comes with something called an Iris lens.
An R what? Or just R?
Just R.
Forget it.
Let us know. Tim can circulate it, and
Tim can pass the word.
You never know. Yeah.
It comes with all the filters and everything, so it's a pretty nice price. And the only reason I'm selling it is I just won't use it. It's just a little bit different to what I do.
Cool. Is there a range of places you can go to? I've been out to Dubbo through the observatory out there and had a look through, lots of lenses and been shown star guides. Is there a range of places around Australia that you'd recommend?
To go to see and do things?
Apart from Brunswick, Victoria.
Flinders Ranges in South Australia is very popular. Nil.
Arkaroola has about 5 observatories at it.
Really? Yeah.
Nil is
all owned by wealthy gentlemen who sit at home at their keyboards playing with the gear out at Arkaroola.
Yeah, the Queensland Astro Fest is coming up in the next few weeks at Camp Duckadang, somewhere 2 hours north west of Brisbane. There's a thing called the South Pacific Star Party, which is in your part of the world. And the reason I'm mentioning star parties is I'd encourage you to go to one. Most astronomical societies have a star party at least once a year, open to the public. And for, probably $5 or something, you can go and look through a whole heap of telescopes and lots of really cool stuff. And they're nice people.
When the weather's good, there's a monthly one run by the Macquarie Uni Astro group.
Yeah, the Macquarie Uni Astro group.
Yep.
If you're just after a reasonable sky, Terry, the Blue Mountains has a couple of spots I can tell you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
The thing is that this kind of stuff it's available to everybody, and wherever you go, you'll find like-minded people. So
Very good.
At 3 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the best Milky Way is in the Blue Mountains at 3 a.m.
No,
There you go.
It's the Blue Mountains in like October.
Yeah, at 3 a.m.
No, at 8 p.m.
There was we went to a star party at Nil. Nil is literally halfway between South Australia and Victoria, and I think they call it Nil because there's just nothing there. It's just flat and empty and fantastic. We take over this whole lodge. The two societies of South Australia and Victoria get together, take over this whole lodge. There's literally 100 and something telescopes on the field, and they have presenters during the day and whatnot. But I think it was 3 o'clock in the morning one night. My telescope's out there doing its thing. I'm sitting on the balcony with a couple of mates, having a drink or two, and this freaking fireball comes screaming across the sky. It was the brightest, most dazzling meteor I've ever seen. It was so bright it actually left a smoke trail behind it. And that was extraordinary to be able to witness that.
They burned out your highlights?
Yeah, sure did.
And when's the best meteor season for viewing in Australia?
Honestly, I think they're overrated. Meteor showers. Okay, background. What is a meteor shower? A meteor shower is when the Earth travels on its orbit through the remains of a comet.
Yeah.
So a comet's gone by and it's gone around the sun, and a fair amount of itself has been broken off or left behind. And so as the Earth travels through that, these little particles or rocks or dust or whatever they are, chunks of ice, they get attracted by the Earth's gravity and they get screaming in through the atmosphere. But to be honest, I've found all of them fairly uneventful. I haven't seen or witnessed, the Aquariid or Orionid meteor shower. They're all fairly non-events, to be honest with you. That's just my experience.
Yeah.
You might find it different.
In comparison to what you've been photographing there tonight, it's chalk and cheese. Yeah.
Yep. But they are, they're cosmically cool things, as is, if you see a lunar eclipse, a blood moon, I mean, my kids always get excited when one of those is on, because you get to see the mechanics of the celestial, bodies in motion. It's pretty amazing when you see one of those. And yes, you can photograph those easily with your own cameras, because no doubt every morning on Facebook, the morning after a lunar eclipse, boom, 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 you get hammered with 6,000 photographs of lunar eclipses. But they're cool.
So you got to wait for Putin's satellites bumping out one of Elon Musk's.
Well, that's
a bit of excitement up there.
Well, there's also the reality that Elon Musk's Starlink satellites are making life a little bit more challenging for us, because he's putting up this massive web, and he's not alone. And obviously, we use software that enables us to filter these things out. But it's going to reach a point at some level where it's no longer feasible to be able to take out all these streaks. Because when a satellite goes through your shot, through your sub-exposure, it's this great big screaming white line. And sometimes you'll get 5 or 6 different satellites going through your shot. Just, it's kind of crazy what's out there.
Yeah, there was something on the ABC recently that showed like a global shot, like a weather forecast of 80,000 satellites up there, trying to plot, how not to be hit by one.
Yep.
So, amazing.
Yeah, pretty crazy
I didn't realise
stuff.
it had that effect on the astrophotography.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Well, they're in low Earth orbit, so they're actually, they're all circulating in different, but they're all, at roughly the same altitude, fairly low Earth orbit.
Yeah, the Ukrainians are even using them to do communications against the Russians. So amazing.
Very good.
There you go, Rob.
So were there any other questions, guys, or should we wrap it up for the night?
Yeah, Robin's got one.
Yeah. When you say that it took a couple of months to get a photo, what does that mean practically? That you leave the camera on for a couple of months, or you take a shot every 15 minutes for a couple of months?
I see. Okay, I might have been chatting with Terry about this during the break. We take a series of what are called sub-exposures. So as the telescope is tracking, let's say for this particular object, I might shoot 15-minute exposures in hydrogen alpha. So literally 4 times an hour, it's going to take a shot, keep tracking, take a shot, keep tracking, take a shot, keep tracking, take a shot. And at the end of the night, I might have 7 hours of data of hydrogen alpha, which I can then stack together using software and the reason we stack it is because the signal to noise ratio becomes clearer. So we get a clearer, sharper, less grainy looking photo. And the more data you throw at it, the clearer and sharper and so forth it will become. And we repeat that with each filter. So with some filters, the red, green, and blue, if I'm just shooting star color, I may need only an hour of data of each color. But if I want to get the deep tendrils of something, I might need to do this for many nights. So with Melbourne's weather, that might mean if I'm shooting at home, I've got to set everything up, position it, tell it where it is. So then its GPS will kick in and it'll know where it's going. And then obviously once that's happened, it'll shoot through the night. That's great. It's going to rain the next night, so I'll pack it all up, take it home, put it inside. Then the next clear night, we'll set it all up again and keep going on the same shot. And because I've got the NUC and the program and the computer and so forth, it's going to know where to pick up from where it left off last time. So as long as it remains clear, I can keep imaging.
Yeah.
And that's why some of these images take nights, weeks, months to build.
And
you've got to be a little bit obsessive and a little bit crazy.
When do you decide you've got enough images to stop building?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
When do you decide you've got enough images to stop building the...
A little bit of experience goes a long way. And some of the new software that we have now, there's some fantastic stuff. And you guys need to get onto this if you're doing some night shots for us for the next couple of weeks. Get onto something called Noise Exterminator. And that's a plugin for Photoshop. And it'll blow your mind. It is that good that it means that I can take less data than I used to have to, but running this AI-based noise removal software, it'll give me a really clear image with a lot less of the data than I needed to get before. Mind-blowing stuff that's out there now.
It doesn't need any stars?
No, actually, this one doesn't touch them. It's designed by an astrophotographer.
Good.
A guy called Russell Croman. It's mind-blowing.